Okay, hi everybody. We're back again for completing our previous lesson, which is the types of energy. So today we will complete talking about the last type of heat energy, which is the radiation, and some examples related to this lesson. And for reminding you, in the last session we were explaining only two types of heat energy, which are convection and conduction. And today we are going to finish the lesson by explaining the radiation and how you can differentiate between the radiation and other kind of heat energy like convection and conduction. Let's go guys, and we start with feeling radiance. So here in this image, I think all of you remember this image. There are three types of heat here, by the way. So here is the convection. Because why guys is convection? Why we call the space here or this image here exactly is convection? Because what? Because here the radiation of the fire the radiation of the fire or the campfire starting to heat what? The particles of the gas. So the particles of the gas start to move. For that reason we call this is example of what? Convection. Okay, what about the boy who using a rod in case of heating the rod? So what will happen here exactly when the boy touching the rod here exactly? So we call this conduction because there are two objects that are in touching, which is the rod itself, the iron of rod, and your hand. For that reason there's two objects in touching, which is the conduction. So what about the radiation? Because the firelight itself is radiation. By the way, radiation is mean the wave, electromagnetic wave. For that reason we call this radiation. Okay guys, so the campfire is example of what guys? Of convection and radiation. Convection and radiation. Radiation and convection. Convection because it heat the particles of the gas or heat the gas that's surrounding the fire or the campfire. And radiation because the fire itself produce radiation. For that reason, or produce electromagnetic waves. These electromagnetic waves we call it what? Radiation. Okay guys, let's go to the next slide now. Okay, heat movements. Heat moves by conduction between solids that are touching, right? Did you remember this example guys? So the conduction, I told you, your hand and what exactly? The handle of the kettle here. So this is example of what? Of conduction. So here the burner is example of radiation because the burner will produce what? Will produce a heat energy. This heat energy is what exactly? Is radiation. This radiation will help to what? To heat the kettle itself. So when the kettle itself absorb enough energy, so the water start to boil. So when the water start to boil, the particles of water starting to move, right? Starting to move. For that reason we call the particles of water that move what? Convection. Okay guys, this is what we mean. So for that reason the first example is conduction because the hand and the handle of the kettle are in touching. For that reason we call what? We call it conduction. So here heats move by convection through gases and liquids. We know that also. Heats. And the second type of heat is what exactly? The convection. Because why? Because there's a move or motion in particles. Like what? The movement of particles in water or gases, we call it always convection guys. Don't forget that. So always the movement of particles in water or gas is example of convection. Okay guys. Can heat travel without medium? So any one of you think about that? The sun, and we know that the sun is produced what exactly? The radiation itself or light. Always sun produce light. So the light that travel from the sun to the earth is example of radiation, by the way. So distance traveled by the light from the sun to earth is example of what? Example of radiation. Because why? Because the radiation can travel without medium. That's what I mean. Because the radiation can travel without medium. For that reason when we say that the radiation travel without medium, it means without particles of gases or water or anything. It's the light can travel in space without medium. This is what we mean. So for that reason we call it radiation. Okay guys, so it take only 8 minutes for what? For reaching to the earth, to the surface of the earth. So it will pass the atmosphere that surround the earth itself to reach to the surface of the earth in what? In only 8 minutes. For that reason the light that comes from the sun to the earth, it take only 8 minutes. So, and the distance is what? 90 million miles. Okay, 90 million miles. So for that reason, even of the huge distance, there is what? There is only a short time of what? Of the radiation to travel from the sun to the earth. Okay guys? Here, now, heat travels from the campfire by what? Convection and radiation. So I told you this is example of what? If you see always this picture, you will know that the heat travel by what? Two kinds of energy. Is what exactly? Convection and radiation. Radiation because the fire itself produce what? Electromagnetic waves, and because what? Because also the heat itself will what? Will start, or the energy of heat will start to heat exactly the particles of the gas that surrounding the fire here. For that reason we call the particles of the gas that is absorb the heat from the fire what? Convection. So radiation is the transfer of heat without matter to carry it. We mentioned that in the previous slide when I told you that the sun produced light and the light will travel through the space to reach the earth, passing exactly what? The atmosphere that surround the earth. For that reason, even the huge distance between the earth and the sun, that light can travel easily in only short time, which is 8 minutes only. Okay guys, so heat leaves one object and goes to another. So what does mean of that? We know that heat can transfer from one object to another from the sun. For the sun is the heat resource, okay, and the heat that come from the sun will travel to the earth. This is the second object. Okay guys, so heat leaves one object and goes to another. So radiation, the heat that travel from the sun to the earth, is called what? Radiation, because what? Is transfer of heat without matter to carry it. Like what? Like gas, or no need. So the light no need for doesn't need medium like gas or water or anything to travel, because the light can travel without medium. That's what I mean. So heat leaves one object and is transferred one to the other. So radiation is the most important way heat can move. Okay, okay, heat leaves one object and goes to another. So this is example also why the heat is important, or the most important thing in our life is the energy of heat that's coming from the sun, because it helps the plants to grow. And what else? It helps the plant to make its own food. Did you remember the photosynthesis process? So this process will happen because what exactly? Because the energy that's coming from the sun, or the radiation that comes from the sun. For that reason the plants will start to grow. Here, this is example of what? Of what? Radiation or convection or conduction. The greenhouse. All of you know the greenhouse. We grow inside the greenhouse so many kinds of plants, but how the plants are growing here inside the greenhouse here is by what? Absorbing a light. So this one is building by what exactly, guys? This one is built by what exactly? Building that heat, that what? Heated with what? Solar radiation, guys. This one use solar radiation. For that reason the plants start to grow. So after the medium here, after the greenhouse, using what? Using the solar radiation. How to control the temperature here, or the radiation that you wanted to grow the plants here, by some fans inside the greenhouse here, and some air conditioner. For that reason, they control the heat inside the greenhouse here. For that reason, this is example of convection inside the greenhouse. And the solar cells that absorb the light from the sun is example of what? Of radiation. So this example of what? Of convection and radiation both together. Why? Because the radiation will heat the air inside the greenhouse here and reducing the oxygen and producing more carbon dioxide by distributing the heat. What? By what exactly? The fans inside the greenhouse here. And what else? The radiation itself that coming from the sun to the solar cells are what exactly? Example of what? Of radiation. For that reason, there are two examples: convection inside the greenhouse and radiation outside the greenhouse itself. Okay, I think all houses that you visit, always you find like this device. What this device exactly, guys, is the radiator. Radiator produce heat, right, guys? So this one example of what? So this is what? Example of three kinds of heat: convection, conduction, and radiation. Why? Because the radiator produce radiation, right, guys? The radiation will be controlled by what exactly? By fans, or sometime, yes, or some devices like fans that to distribute the heat in all over the room. And what else? The particles of the gases around what? That surrounding the radiator will start to move and absorbing the heat from the radiator. For that reason, we call this what? Convection. This is example of convection, because there's air surrounding what? There are so many gases that surrounding the radiator. For that reason, the gases that surrounding the radiator will absorb the heat. For that reason, you will feel the heat, because what? The particles of the gases that surround you are hot, because coming from where? From the radiator itself. So the radiator is example of what? Is example of radiation and convection. Okay, so now I will start to give you more examples here in the book in case to understand more. So here, this is the page, feeling radiant. Okay, feeling radiant. So feeling radiant, it means what exactly? When the heat travel from one object to other by what exactly? By the radiation. When two objects are in touching, or there's a medium between them, like a particles of gas or water. Here, now they give you example, another example of what? Of the heat, how transfer from different objects. See here, the room is cool and air conditioned. So on the other hand, heat radiating from this light keeps the young chickens warm. So this is example of radiation, by the way, and what? Convection. Because why? Because the heat that comes from the light to the chicken here is example of radiation. The radiation that the light travel from the light resource to the chicken itself. And what else? There is another example of heat, like what? Like the air, or the warm air that surround the chicken here. So we call this one also is what? Convection. Okay, here they give you another example. Heat from the sun radiates through space and through the atmosphere before it warms this girl face. So the heat the heat that coming from the sun will what exactly? It will warm the face of the girl here. So by what exactly? By the radiation, the girl will absorb enough energy from the sun, because, or the skin of the of the girl will absorb enough energy from the sun by what? By the radiation. So for that reason, I will tell you something about the radiation. I told you the radiation is electromagnetic waves. For you know that, I mean. So, but not all the waves are electromagnetic waves will reach to the surface of the earth. Why? Because there is atmosphere that protect our earth from the sun. For that reason, not all the waves will reach the surface of the earth. Only a few kinds of waves will reach the surface of the earth, and the harmful kinds of waves will be absorbed by the atmosphere. Okay, guys. Now here they're asking you to circle exactly what? To circle the objects that are radiation hit, or circle the objects that are radiating heat. Like what? This one. This is example of radiation, guys. Correct, guys, or no? So this one is example of radiation, and another kind is candle. Okay, this is another kind of what? Of radiation. Like the campfire is example also of what? Of radiation. Now I will start to summarize the what? The two kinds of energy, or the three kinds of heat energy. So I will write it for you here in case to remember them easily. Okay, let's start with what exactly, guys? I will start to write the definition of convection. Okay, convection. So this is the first type that we learned already. Is what exactly? Convection. We can differentiate between convection and conduction and radiation by what, guys? By write the definition or scientific definitions of them. Okay, the first one is the convection. We can understand the convection by what exactly? By the actual what? By actual motion. By actual motion of matter. Of matter. Like what, guys? Air and water. Okay, let's move now to the second definition, which is what? The conduction. Or let's define radiation. Okay, radiation. So radiation is what, guys, now? So radiation is electromagnetic waves. Waves. Okay, radiation is electromagnetic waves. Okay, guys, that come from the sun or the energy source, like what? Campfire or light or the sun itself, or so many kind of stars in the solar system. Okay, guys, now we should go to the next definition, which is the last one. I think we didn't define it, which is the conduction. Conduction is what? Conduction. Okay, conduction. Okay, who remember now the definition of the conduction is what, guys? Try to remember. Is the direct contact. We can say it the direct. Sorry. Contact between two objects that are okay, that are touching. So is the direct contact between two objects that are touching. Okay, I think we understand the three definition of heat energy. Convection by actual motion. Did you remember that? Because air and water starting to move, because what? The particles starting to move because it's absorb enough energy from the heat energy. For that reason, they starting to move. Okay guys, for that reason we call it what? Convection. For that reason we call it actual what? Motion. Actual motion, it's mean when the particles of air or water starting to move. Radiation, because I told you any kind of waves are examples of what? Of radiation. Okay, and the last one is the conduction, is the easiest one because I give you so many examples about this one. Direct contact between what exactly? Two objects that are in touching or touching each other. Okay guys, this is the three examples. Now I will start to solve with you now the classwork or the revision, and I will give you some questions as a homework, so don't worry about that. Let's here start to define the first question. He asking you to define the following. Okay, the heat. Okay, if you are now with me, please open your booklet, page 54. Okay guys, page 54. So heat is what exactly, guys? I will write the definition here in case to understand everything. I will zoom in the writing here. Let me see. I will try to zoom in what? The words here, okay? But let me write the definition first, and then I will zoom in the definition itself. Okay, the energy. Okay, sorry. The energy. Okay, the energy. We can define the heat as the energy, what? That moves, okay? That moves. Okay, moves between what? Between two objects. Okay, between or between objects indifferent what, guys? Indifferent temperature. Okay guys, this is the definition of the heat. Okay guys, now question number 2, choose the correct answer. So here there's a multiple choice. There's a multiple choices examples. You have to solve it. I will solve with you these equations because I think it's not easy to solve it by yourself. I will help you for that reason. I will help you to solve it with me. Okay. So the first question is: the sun heat your face directly by what exactly, guys? Which example is what? Of heat that what? Travel from object to another directly. Convection or radiation or conduction. Try to remember, guys, which one of them is the example of directly. Heats your face directly by what, guys? Radiation. I told you is radiation because the sun here, they talking about the sun here. For that reason, sun produce what exactly? Heat or radiation. The sun produce radiation. This radiation or waves will help to what? To warm your face and your body. Okay, number 2. When heat moves through a liquid or gas, it's called what? Convection, radiation, or conduction. Again, liquid or gas. Here give you example of particles that move because of heat. So convection, sure. Is convection, sure. Okay guys, is convection. Number 3, heat transfer between two touching solids. Touching solids. What does mean of that, guys? I told you any two objects in touching that are example of what, guys? Of conduction. Okay, guys. So we have to write here what? Conduction. Here, number 4, heat moves from object to cold ones. Heat move from warm to cold one. Okay, from warm one to the cold one. Okay guys, so this is example of what? Of heat that move from warm object to cold object. So here another example, number 5. Bilal uses a thermometer to take a single reading of water in beaker. What is Bilal measuring exactly, guys? Here Bilal measuring what exactly, guys? He want to take a single reading of what? Sure, of temperature. So he will measure what exactly? The temperature of water. For that reason we will select what? Amount of heat energy of the water. For that reason we select this one. Okay guys, we select this answer. Okay guys, we select this answer. Okay, number 6. On a warm sunny day, a lizard sits on a rock. So which word explain why a lizard feels heat from the sun? Because convection or gravity or radiation, guys? See, rock is not example of particles that move, right? So this one is not convection. But is radiation is correct because warm coming from where? From the sun. So for that reason the sun will give us waves that heat the rock and the body of the lizard. For that reason we call it what? Radiation. Okay, number 7 now. Number 7. Sorry. Okay, number 7. Jasmine knows that conduction is a form of heat energy transfer. Which transfer of heat energy is made through conduction, guys? So which one is example of what? Of conduction, guys? Sure, the first one. Why the first one, guys? Why we select the first one? Because there is what? Two objects in what? In touching, the hand and the snowball. For that reason we select this one. Why we didn't select the radiator warms a home? Why, guys? Because the radiator itself is example. I told you many times, radiator is example of what, guys? Of radiation and convection and conduction. 3 types of energy in the same time. So is radiation is example of radiation and convection. So for that reason this one is not the correct example, because it's not talking only about conduction, but it's talking about radiation and convection as well. So boiling water heats pasta. So this one example of what, guys? Boiling water. So boiling water is mean there's a particle that moves in motion. That's what I mean. So for that reason I will write here this is example of convection, is not example of what? Of conduction. Okay, this is example of convection. Sun warms a greenhouse. The greenhouse, I told you many times, example of what, guys? 3 types of what? Or at least 2 types of energy that are radiation and convection. Convection. Okay, convection. Why is example of radiation and convection? Because the sun produces waves. The waves are example of radiation. And convection, because why? Because how to control the heat inside the greenhouse? By what, guys? By the fans and producing too much carbon dioxide inside the greenhouse and reduce the quantity of oxygen. And what the fans work like what? Like distributing the heat inside the greenhouse. For that reason is example of what? Of convection inside the greenhouse. The controlling of heat inside the greenhouse is example of convection, and radiation is example of the waves that come from the sun and absorbed by what exactly? The solar cells. Okay, the last question here, number 8. Oh, sorry. Okay, each picture shows a source of heat. Which picture shows the heat transfer through convection? So which one is example of convection, guys? I will tell you something. D, sure, the conduction. Why? Because there's 2 objects are in touching, the cube of ice and your hand. Okay, what about this one? This is example of radiation. The heat that comes from the sun to the surface of the water here is example of what? Of radiation. What about this one? This is example of what, guys? Because the greenhouse always building by what? That the building that is heated with solar radiation. Okay, guys, this is a building that is heated by what exactly? Solar radiation. For that reason, this is example of 2 kinds or 2 types of energy, which are convection and radiation. Radiation from the sun and convection. That because why? Because you control the heat or the temperature inside the greenhouse by what? By fans and reducing carbon dioxide gases and reducing the oxygen gases. Okay, now we still have only one example. This is the correct example. Is example of what, guys? This is this image is what? It has two kinds of heat energy, which are conduction, if you touch the handle of the kettle, and what else? The water, the particles of water that are in move. For that reason, this is the convection. Here, example of convection, the particle that move, the particles of water that move because the energy or the radiation that coming from the burner. So this is example of what? Of convection. So the C is the C. This is the, okay, the correct answer. Let's go to the last question. Sorry for the sound, I am so sorry. This table shows some sources of heat. Okay, rays of the sun, electric space heater, oven with a fan, oven with the fan. So you can see it in, so you can see like these devices. Not only, sometimes not all the ovens have fan. Some of them they're using what? Radiation of the microwave. You know the microwave radiation. Microwave, by the way, the microwave is a radiation. Okay, guys, and hot plate. So this one example of what? Let's start with number 4. Hot plate is example of what, guys? Of conduction. Why, guys? Because conduction between the is hot plate is why it's hot. Because why, guys? Because energy resource that coming from the food or from the soup and the blade itself. So there's touching between them, two objects that are in touching. For that reason, this one example of what? Conduction. What about this one? Convection. Because fan it's mean there is a particles of air that surround the fan. For that reason, the fan is example of what? Of convection. Okay, what about the rays of the sun? Is example of what, guys? Radiation. Radiation and convection, by the way. Rays of the sun is example is example of what? Two kinds of energy, radiation and convection. What about the electric space heater? What does electric space heater have to is what? Is radiation and what? Electric space heater is radiation and what? Convection. Okay, guys, radiation and convection both together. So which one is the correct answer? Which source will transfer heat through convection? Which one is example of convection between them? 2 and 3. Why 2 and 3, guys? 2, because this one is example, I told you, of what exactly? Of radiation and convection, and this one example of convection. For that reason, 2 and 3 are two example of what? Of convection. Okay, guys, I think our lesson is so easy. Thank you for listening and goodbye.